Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Tying with the Pros. We're here tonight with John Cooper. John is a Mainer and one of the under the radar guys in the musky fly fishing and fly tying space. He usually keeps to himself, but he can't help but end up in the spotlight here and there. He a few years ago caught, I guess closer to 4 years ago now, caught a 53.5-inch river muskie with Luke Swanson and Living the Dream in Minnesota. And there are pictures of that fish all over. But John is the perpetual tinkerer in the fly tying space. Can't help himself but want to improve every single aspect of all the different predator and musky fly patterns that we're all familiar with. So with that, John, what are you going to be tying with us tonight?
Thanks. I think maybe that was generous, a generous way to introduce me. As noted, I'm a Mainer. So much of my musky fishing is north on the border between Maine and Canada, and some of the lakes that are in Maine. We tend to get a lot of muskie, but not a lot of really large fish. We can have occasionally fast fishing. They're still musky. We get a lot of follow days, and so the problems that maybe we face, or the challenges that we face in fly design, tend to be on a little smaller scale, a little smaller platform than a lot of what you get in the Midwest. Although what I am going to tie today has proven itself in the Midwest as well, and as well as up on the Ottawa River. So it's a small fly, but can pack a big punch. We have dubbed it the smoker, and it is an articulated pattern, but a single hook pattern. It's maybe only a 7 or 8 inch fly, and it leverages rabbit strips, deer hair, flash, and any number of feathers or anything else that you want to add. And I think it's worth noting that calling it a pattern is maybe less applicable than calling it a platform. It's the thing that makes it a smoker is that it has a bulky head and a deer and a rabbit strip tail. And I think those things in combination really create a lot of a two-pronged series of movement. The deer hair really kind of puts on the brakes. So you get the turning of the fly and the erratic movement of the fly when you pull and pause. But then the rabbit strips in the back just soften in the water, obviously, and have a tremendous amount of movement. And so you get an awful lot of residual action from those rabbit strips. And it also becomes a really effective pattern in moving water because of that as well. It takes on some of the traits that you might see with maybe those game changer style patterns, which are designed more to produce a wiggle than a turn or a jerk style action. So it gives a little bit of the best of both worlds. It also came up at a time when feathers became really popular for hairstyles, and the cost of schlappen and big rooster saddles went from $20 for a saddle to $500 for a saddle.
And you used what feathers you had in your own hair, right?
I obviously have used a lot of hair extensions for a long time, and my glamour days are kind of behind me. But I was obviously a big feather merchant for fashion and trying to adorn myself.
For anyone who doesn't know, that will not be the last shot or banter in this session. John is one of the guys who took me under his wing, along with Jeff Faulkner and Jeremy Boulier, a couple fellow Mainers, when I was connecting all the dots from gear fishing for musking as a kid and you know, getting after it with a fly rod. So I'm sure that he will fire some shots back at some point. I'll definitely look forward to those. But yeah, with that, so yeah, you were saying that, you know, during that hair extension craze, they became prohibitively expensive if you could find them.
If you could find them, yeah.
And so you started using rabbit strips. And how would you say that impacted the action? You talked a little bit about comparing it to a Buford and putting on the brakes with the head that way. Do you feel like that's a fly you want to use in the same types of waters? No, why?
So I would say, you know, and again, I'm certainly biased. We all develop our opinions based on our experiences, and my experiences particularly in my home waters, but also I've done trips to Wisconsin and to Canada and to Minnesota. And my experience is that for a fly in the 8-inch size range, I actually prefer the smoker platform, the rabbit strip, to the schlappen or the saddle feathers. I think if you want to upsize the fly, those, you know, obviously feathers you can get a lot longer. If you try to lengthen the rabbit, it doesn't taper like a feather, so that starts to present a problem. It retains a lot more water, so if you wanted to have enough tails to present bulk out, you know, several more inches, the castability becomes a real issue. At 8 inches, castability is not an issue.
But you're going to want a 10 weight for it if you're fishing it all day. I mean, it gets pretty heavy, at least in my experience.
I think so. I mean, I can throw it on a 9. I think, you know, we have a lot of benefit from purpose developed fly lines and rods that can turn the fly over like this a lot easier than, you know, even 20 years ago. I would say the rods were there 20 years ago, but the lines, you know, I'm rather partial to airflow lines, but you know, each of the major line manufacturers, whether it's Cyangler or Rio or Airflow, all make an aggressive headed line to throw a fly, you know, of this ilk. You know, whether it be, I know they don't make outbound short anymore, but whatever the Rio makes,
a short, heavy head to turn stuff over.
That replaced the outbound short. I really like the Airflow sniper lines for this in the 420 grains. But so, you know, at this size range, I really like it. I think the movement and the amount of material in rabbit strips really creates a beautiful fly in the water at this size. I fish plenty of the feathered flies at the size as well. Although I've typically moved away from a bulky deer hair head on most of those feather-based flies. Not because they aren't effective, just because I like tinkering and I'm doing other stuff now for the most part. But this particular fly, with the articulation, the singular articulation, and the rabbit strips, has just been really effective too. It's just really worked, and that type of feedback makes me like it a lot more. So it's been, you know, the first time, and this is the original one that I ever tied. You know, I should be giving credit to the person who got me hooked on the idea of double rabbit strips out the back. I saw it on a YouTube, and I can't remember the person's name, and I've never heard from them again, but they did a particular sucker pattern. It was a musky fly, and they used twin rabbit tails to elongate that fly. One thing they did that I really didn't like was they attached the rabbit directly to the hook shank. And I don't know how many of you have ever fished rabbit strips directly attached to the hook shank, but they tend to go like this.
Yeah,
as soon as you cast them. So
for sure.
I knew from my steelhead days that, even shorter rabbit strips tend to find a way around that hook shank. So I knew I wanted to solve that problem. And one attempt that I did to solve that problem was just to put it on a shank behind the hook. And that not only solved the problem of fouling, but it really seemed to enhance the action and really make the rabbit go a little bit crazy, while the rest of the fly was just doing a simple turn.
Yeah, and,
So
and for anyone who's curious, we talk about evolving patterns, and there's flies that work and there's flies that catch anglers, and this is one of those patterns that does both. The fly that John was just holding up there, John, you were just saying how many fish you've caught on that fly so far. How many was it?
I retired the fly probably 5 years ago, but I caught 10 muskies in Maine on the fly in, a couple of trips, really. Maybe a few days of fishing, but I'm not somebody who fishes the same fly all day. So it was definitely one of those circumstances where I would switch flies and then I'd put this fly back on and I'd immediately get feedback again. And it just happened to be a really good fly. And even on some tough days when I was struggling to get a bite, I somehow pulled out the win with that particular fly. And so a lot of times it has more to do with a singular fly. There's been plenty of cases where I tie the exact same pattern, I try to replicate it, and you don't get a ton of feedback with muskie. So you think you have the same fly out there and you don't catch anything on it, and it's hard to know whether it's just that they aren't biting or if there's something about the fly that's different. But it seemed like that smoker pattern just seemed to trigger fish when other things weren't.
It has. I mean, what Jeremy caught what were you saying? Was it a 49.5 on the Ottawa? On the
49.5 on a smoker. So a really large fish on a very small fly.
Something about it.
And during a trip to Wisconsin, we were doing a float, an unguided float, and with Jeff on the oars, Jeremy got like a 43-inch fish on a black smoker just as the sun was going down in like a foot of water. It was just an incredible scene. It was almost scary because he hooked this fish and it didn't do much, but it's getting dark, and then all of a sudden it got near the boat and it just exploded, and it seemed like it was a 50-inch fish.
Speaking of 50s,
it didn't turn out to be that big, but it turned out to be one of the biggest fish of the whole trip. So it was a great fish.
And speaking of 50s, one of our guys, what's Gordon's last name, out in New York, just broke the 50 mark on the black and gold smoker that I modeled off of that fly that Jeremy caught it with. So I mean, this pattern
Awesome.
it works everywhere.
It's great, and and it's I like it because it is a small fly that fishes big, and there are a lot of great flies and a lot of great tyers out there, and this is just one that I happen to like, that I had a hand in creating. And
that's awesome. It was Gordon
Stevens,
by the way.
What?
It was Gordon Stevens, by the way. I didn't want to misquote his last name. Yeah, keep going.
And certainly I did the early prototype of this fly, and then Jeff took it, and Jeff is a commercial tyer, and Jeff has forgotten more about fly tying than I'll ever know, but he improved aspects of the fly and took that platform and did a lot of variation with it, and also was probably the first one to get its name out there a little bit. So he has a lot of relationships with folks.
He named it for you too, did he not? Is that a family-friendly story?
He has a history. He has a history of naming anything that I tie something sort of controversial or derogatory. And so smoker is maybe not the original name, but it's a derivative of the original name.
It is the name now.
And I'm going to leave it at that. I'm too old to be embroiled in controversy or items of poor taste. So
yeah, at least publicly, and we'll go back through this and make sure there's nothing that flirts. We'll probably cut some of that out. We'll find out. We'll see how we did. Well, thank you for coming to share this. I guess, yeah, feel free to dive in, and I'll ask questions just to try and make sure this caters to someone, whether they're just getting into it or if they're deep into the craft. Whether we're commercial or just getting started, there's always something to learn.
Sure. So I've got in my vise, and I don't know if it even shows up.
Yeah, you can see it. You can see the shank in there.
You can see it a little bit.
Yeah,
I've got a really fine wire shank. It's probably the equivalent of about a 0.3. So if I tie most of my shank flies, if I'm if I'm doing some kind of big brush type fly, I'm tying typically on 0.51. And the material for the tail or the shank for the tail of the smoker fly does not need to be anything like that. You could certainly put it on 0.41 or 0.4 or whatever, but I want to say this is like, it's like solid shark wire. I think it's intended for building shark leaders more than for a platform for tying a fly or building a lure on. So it's a really fine wire. I'm not putting any hook at the back of this, although I guess in theory you could, although I would just caution that if you put a hook behind the rabbit strips, you're going to be pulling those rabbit strips off the hook all the time. They're always going to be wrapping. That's just what they do. They find a way.
And real quick before John dives all the way in there, there's a few different options we have for making our own shanks or buying our own shanks. I mean, the big game ones, they're really high quality shank. And if you like to, just buy your stuff off the shelf and tie with it, definitely an option. If you're somebody tying at a ton of volume, that may or may not be what you want to do. If you like to tie or make your own shanks to tie on, I know that John uses a set of, I believe he's broken a few pairs of these, the step pliers that kind of have a half moon on one side, and they allow you to work with different wire sizes. But, you can kind of go from this to round nose pliers to, the Boggs tackle makers, what, a bunch of us use, making shanks at volume. But you have options, and really the point of that is no matter how far into fly tying you are or you want to get, you can do something different based on what your budget is. Don't feel like you can't make your own shanks because you can't buy a $150 or $250 wire jig. Like, it's not necessary.
But even the pliers are $15 or $20. So if you're only planning to make a few, it's not a bad idea just to buy them. They're made by a professional process that's going to give you a consistent result every time. Every single time I make a shank, it's a little different length, a little different, twist to it. So I like it. I call it character. But if you want to be really precise about the whole thing, it's a perfectly good idea to go ahead and buy those shanks.
And there's some value there in the conversation about things being a little bit different, and doing whatever you do for the reason that you do it. As John can attest, when I was learning how to tie and when they were kind of taking me under their wing, which is a very generous term for what that was, but they ribbed me healthily, as you would hope. And when we tied, I would sit there with my jaw on the table and I would ask a million questions because I was just so afraid to do it the wrong way. And then one day, after John repeating it for nearly a decade to like, hey, there's no wrong way, do it. I just started doing what I wanted to do. And so, as you're learning to tie, whether it's this pattern or another pattern, we're going to tell you the way that we like to do it. And we'll ask questions to try to give you context and build that kind of gradient of understanding, but don't, if you try a way and you don't like it and you want to do it a different way, do it. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Tie the fly. You may end up finding the next big thing that, pushes our craft to that next step.
Substitute materials, try to upsize, try to downsize, do all sorts of things. And maybe you'll develop something that's better. Maybe it'll be better for your application, or maybe you'll cast it 5 times and say, oh, that's just not going to
Never
happen.
doing that again.
And I do all of those. I am definitely a chronic fly switcher. I like to swim a bunch of things, and I like to tie a bunch of variations. And one of the problems is I tie a bunch of variations in the winter, and then I go out in the summer and I start swimming a bunch of them, and I hit one and I say, oh my God, that is amazing. What did I do? And I just don't have any, I don't have any remembrance of how I did a certain thing. And so
and the ones that he does remember are a lot of the patterns that we offer now. John, did his thing to patterns like, the Optimist Swine, Eli Brandt, am I saying that correctly? With Great Lakes Fly, Eli, he came up with Optimist Swine, and John said, I wonder if I do this thing a little bit different. And, all of a sudden the mechanical bull was born. And then we started tinkering again and said, well, what if we change this hardware configuration? And all of a sudden we had the rodeo clown. And, where we started with the river pig, John was like, I'm going to articulate this because I want to see how big I can get it, and started catching big muskies with that. And so, yeah, like, take this and you can tie the exact pattern if you want, but if you want to push it and change it and see what you can do, that's highly encouraged too. And share, it's how we grow.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, Eli's pattern, that Optimist Swine, is a great example. I was out fishing with Chris Willen, and he had a Willen's Villain Optimist Swine that he put on for me, and it moved. I still, to this day, I've never fished a fly that moved that wide and that precisely. It was just so perfect. And, I caught a nice muskie that day, and I had a couple others chase that fly. And so I got interested in it, and I just had a little trouble replicating that much action and that consistent of an action. And I spoke to others who have had similar problems, and so I started tinkering with the platform and the materials. And so I think Eli's fly is amazing, and I'm probably just not doing it right. So I found something that I can do right, and I get a more consistent fly.
It's highly repeatable. Yeah, they swim incredibly. I mean, the feedback we've gotten on that pattern has been unbelievable. I mean, from fish and from anglers. I mean,
but somebody else could try to tie that pattern and say, no, I can much easier replicate it Eli's way, and that wouldn't surprise me at all. So but what an unbelievable platform he developed with that fly. It's so innovative, and that's what this is all about. Is you put a platform out there, and then it gives people the opportunity to make derivatives from that platform, and maybe it'll work better for them, or maybe it'll apply to a particular situation and just be another sort of weapon in the arsenal. But it's just little pockets of innovation. The platforms are largely developed. There's just people who have put so much thought into action, and now we're just sort of taking those platforms and trying to solve different sort of micro problems that we face in specific fisheries or in our local waters. And that's where most of the innovation, I think, is coming from now. Just so that I can go to bed at some point tonight, I am gonna get started with this pattern. So we've got the shank in. I've started with some 210 denier. I've got Danville flat waxed, although I like Flymaster Plus as well.
The green or the silver
some
label?
People, this is the green label. Some people like the gel spun, which I think is
There's
not the
finesse
best,
plus.
not the best for this pattern. Just because I don't like how slippery it is personally. But if that's what you like, just use a little glue, and you can obviously heave a lot of pressure on gel spun, and it's a good option for certain types of patterns. So I'm going to start with just a regular tan bucktail for this one. So I'll do a natural colored fly. And for a lot of this is another just personal preference. I tend to have a bit of bias on my flies to some white feathers or white, in this case, white rabbit out at the tail. Even for the natural colored flies, or even for some hot colored flies, I feel like they all look good with white tails. And so if you can only get one color of, tails or feathers or things, white's not a bad option, because you can combine it with any other colors. Even white to black always looks good. And so it's not a bad tail color. Obviously, I don't always do that. There's all sorts of hot colors. I've got natural tan barred, which would be a good option here. We tie a lot in black. But in this case, I'm going to do a natural colored fly, but I'm going to use a white tail on the fly. But I'm going to start with a tan bucktail, and I'm grabbing a fairly small clump from the base.
How long would you say that first tie-in is, if you had a couple inches? And are you going for hollow hair? Are you going for something that flares on the shank, or what are you trying to do?
I am going for hollow hair. I want the flare, and I don't care about the length at all. I've done this with belly hair just as often as with deer hair. I happen to have deer hair at the base, which is nice and hollow. It's going to flare, but what I want is flare, and more importantly, what I want is kind of like a spreader to keep the two rabbit tails from just matting together. So I'm going to go ahead. This is not a reverse tie. I'm going to do a regular tie-in. And my thread is only 2/3 of the way back on the shank. It's a 1-inch shank, and I'm not worried about kissing way to the back.
Because you're not going to put a hook on that or anything.
I'm not going to put a hook on this, and I'm not trying to do a ton of material back here, so I don't need to interact with my vise. I'm just going to come forward a little bit, and it's going to make the tie-in a little bit easier for me.
You got like a half a pencil type of thing there, or what are you working with?
Material
amount. Yeah.
Half a pencil, maybe 2/3 of a pencil. And you could use a little more or less. It's, to be perfectly honest, what I'm doing is just putting a dam in, right? So people do all sorts of different spreaders, things like that, to make the next thing that they tie in work. That's what this is. It does put some flare out the back. So I'm going to go around once, I'm going to go around twice, and then I'm going to release it. And on my third time, I'm going to let it roll. And so now I've got, a couple inches of hair sticking out here, and then like a little mini muddler head. And I'm going to weave my thread through that a couple times to really lock it in. And then I'm going to pull the head back and just build a little dam in front of it with my thread.
And so I was just going to draw a comparison. We did a video last night, and we'll show it a little out of order when we share that, but with Marlon Prince doing a game changer, and before he puts the bucktail and the flash on each shank in the game changer, he does like a wrap of a brush to support that material. So to your point on preparing for the next piece, this is kind of like the brush support. You're supporting and spreading those rabbit strips.
It's 100% support. Yep, that's a great way to say it. It's exactly what I'm going for. And I can't find okay. And then I'm going to put some white rabbit, and What I do, a typical, if you buy a typical rabbit, whether you get a hide or whether you get a bunch of strips, I'm basically taking a strip, folding it over and cutting it perfectly in the middle. And that's my tail. Those two pieces become the length of my tail. That might actually look a little long. I happen to think that muskie tend to like things that are a little on the long side. Like if you have a little extra length out the back and a little extra movement, that's nice. But even if it does feel a little bit long, you can always cut it later. You can't make it longer later. So I'm not pre-cutting this. I'm not trying to anticipate, how to make it look perfectly proportioned. I just want to get it on the hook. So what I'm doing to attach it to the shank is I'm just forward of this deer hair clump that I have. I'm going to put it on the top third of the shank, but facing, so the one on my side is facing somewhat towards me, almost like you would.
Here, let me just, the camera's gonna jump to me on show. So if this is the shank and I'm holding my hand here, he's putting each of those almost at, let's say, 130 and 10, 30, 11 kind of. So on the top part of the shank, but on the sides, so that you get that nice kind of split action on the fly, or at least on the rabbit strips.
Doing the same thing with feathers would be called tenting.
Yep.
So we're going to tent them. They're kind of they're coming up to a peak almost together. You don't need to do it that way. You can absolutely do one side or the other. That would work fine too. I don't have any evidence that one way works better than the other. I'm just specifying how I do it.
Well, we're talking theory there. I feel like that would probably help decrease fouling. I mean, I know you have the shank to extend it out the back, but if you're closer to that hook bend underneath where it's keeled, I could see an increased likelihood to foul.
I think so. I've done it both ways, and because I've got more material that's going to go in front of it, that's going to hold it, it's going to support it back too. It shouldn't foul no matter how you do it. It should be fine. And
real quick, I noticed you tie that in there. Would you say you're tying in about a 1/4 inch of the rabbit strip when you lock everything in there? Or how much?
Yeah, just enough to get bite. And this one I got a 1/4 inch or so.
Okay.
If that hide looks solid and you can bite into it, it doesn't take much at all. And it does create some bulk on the shank. And so if you do it too long, you're going to have to, your next reverse tie-in is going to be competing with some bulk.
Perfect. And if anybody's curious what tenting looks like, we'll have gone through both of those in the 2 videos before this. So feel free to check out either the River Pig or Buford video. And, if you are curious what that tenting technique looks like and you missed those videos, it'll be in there.
So now I'm gonna add a little bit of flash. I am all over the place as to what I like for flash, but for this particular pattern in the tail, I like that normal limp Flashaboo, the really limp stuff.
That's not even the hollow, is it? That's just the regular Flashaboo?
The hollow is definitely stiffer than this. And so I like the hollow, but I will use the hollow farther up in the body of the fly, but not in the tail, particularly in this tail where I want these rabbit strips to go crazy, but I don't want something stiff to kind of be a hindrance to that, or, and again, I'm making it seem like I've thought way more about this than I have. I've had great luck with this nice limp stuff. I like the way it looks in the water. That's why I use
it. I mean, we overthink it all sometimes. It's part of the fun. I like to use polar flash a lot in the back of flies like this. It's that same limp, but I wouldn't use something that, something stiff necessarily.
I've got the polar flash too, this gold polar flash, and I really like it.
It's always
I actually think it's a little less. I use it all the time in feathered patterns or flies that like the mechanical bull, where I want the whole fly to do a movement. I use it a lot more in flies like that. It's plenty limp, but it's not as limp. This stuff is so limp. This is like it really goes crazy. It's just going to flow all over the place. And in fact, Jeff has taught a fly that uses this gold regular Flashabou clumped and long as like the primary tail.
Joe, we just did a video with our pro staffer Justin Hokinson on a very similar. I would say it's closer to like a Hillbilly Deluxe, like an articulated river pig, but it's a full flash tail.
Yeah, and Jeff would use feathers in addition to the flash, but the feathers would be half an inch shorter than the flash, so it's almost like a whistler. It sticks out the back, and looks fantastic. I just think it's really, as time has gone on, I've used less and less flash in my flies, but I think that it is a really cool material in the tail in particular.
There's a time, a place, and an application for sure.
Absolutely. So now I'm back to my tan bucktail, and I'm going to look for a little longer fibers this time, but not long, just longer,
but less hollow now because you're starting to build your taper.
I've moved up the tail a little bit, but these are still pretty hollow. And for a lot of my saltwater patterns, I don't like a ton of hollow because I like the profile to slim in the water. But for a lot of these musky flies, I actually think as long as your bucktail isn't too long, having it sticking up is not such a bad way to create profile and bulk without a ton of material. So I'm less afraid of the hollow stuff. In this particular case, I don't want it too long because I'm just stripping it out here, getting all the guard hairs out. I don't want it too long because I want these rabbit strips to stick out quite a bit. And so if you do a short shank in the back, and I've got what I would consider maybe a mid-size, like an inch long shank, but if you did even a half inch, one clump would be fine to go in front. And in fact, the original one, I don't know if you can tell, is marabou. It's not, there's no bucktail at all in front of the rabbit. It's just marabou.
You changed it?
Jeff changed it. But and I do it all sorts of ways, but I like this way. I like this way, even though I only have one that I've caught that many on.
Well, and I will say too, like I remember especially when you start to fill your materials collection, if you want to call it that, as you start to kind of build out all your tying supplies. I remember getting certain materials just like, all right, I need this in every color, right? Like I know it's a material I like, and that was the wrong way to do it. You definitely, I think that especially if someone's getting into tying, and there's a running joke that you thought you were getting to tying to save money, and the reality is you're tying to get flies to do what you want them to do and to give yourself different options. But it's a good question to ask yourself, do I have something already that will function in this application, or do I need to add a different material? And sometimes you'll need to, like, don't get me wrong, but it's just a good way to, it's pretty easy to get out of control while you're building up your materials supplies.
Just as an example, I'm gonna I don't know if you can tell on this, but I reverse tied this in, and I'm gonna tie it back a bit, and then I'm gonna finish it with some steelhead stuff just to prove the point. I haven't steelhead fished in a long time, and I've got a ton of steelhead materials that I need to use, so I'm just going to use them now. And it just proves that this fly has certain keys that are going to make it effective. The keys are the rabbit strips and letting them do their thing in the back. And then you need to achieve the right profile to give a good bait fish appearance. And if tied properly, this doesn't look great on land, but boy, oh boy, in the water, it looks fantastic. And then the third thing is the bulk in the head, right? Those create the profile, and creating the profile in action requires some certain things. The rest of it is really just adornment, and do that any way you want. All right, so now I've got that, what is it? I would say that's like tied back in a medium fashion. It's not crazy, but it's tied back somewhat. So now I've got some Steelhead Flash. This is some old, oh God, I don't even know what it's from. It's copper. It's got some like purple.
Is that emulator flashish type stuff?
It's sort of like emulator. It's much shorter, and boy, I loved it for Steelhead. I don't even remember. It hasn't been in the bag that it came in forever. But I'm just going to take a little of that, and I'm going to take some tan marabou, because I've got a ton of it. And so one decent sized marabou feather, and I'm going to tie it in from the tip. And again, I just made this decision. I had not, this was not what I was planning to do, but given that Adam said we can substitute, I decided to.
You wanted to show off. Yeah. And when we post this video, we're going to include a materials list of kind of the stuff that I usually
we'll keep it to the core materials, right?
but depending what, if time allows, you may include kind of a list of, if you want to substitute these options, you can, and don't be afraid to deviate from that.
Sure. And so we know marabou is, I would say, not a great material for musky flies because it's just not very durable, but it looks fantastic. It moves around like crazy. It creates a fly that is really gonna have that extra impression of movement when it's not doing anything but sitting in the water. And so by all means, if you have a feather and you want to stick it on somewhere, go for it. And it palmers really well around the bucktail. So I'm just going to create a little marabou head here.
And the lighting's a little funky on that marabou, just so if somebody's just starting, you're fine. I'm going to describe it. If you're just, thank you very much. If you're just starting to get into tying and you're trying to figure out what John's doing, picking at the marabou fibers as he wraps them around the shank, which we call palmering, he's doing that as not to wrap those fibers around the shank. He's trying to just wrap the stem of the marabou feather around the shank and then get those fibers all facing backward and cooperating. And if you want to just blast through this and you don't care about wrapping a few fibers around, I don't recommend it, but there's times where it's 1:30 in the morning and you're fishing the next day and you don't want to be up late, like crank it out and fire, and you probably fish just.
Yeah, I mean, you also don't need to palmer it. You could always just clump it on.
Well, I don't know about that. Let's be within reason, man.
I mean, you just tie it on in a clump, pointing it back. And I do plenty of patterns for, say, lake trout and stuff like that, where that's what I do.
Oh, I'm playing. I'm sure it would be fine. But yeah, we traditionally we wrap the shank and palmer the marabou here if you're going to use marabou. We don't always use. I mean, I've done this step with emulator flash, with predator wrap, with God, there's a dozen different materials, and you'd probably be fine with all of them.
Well, and part of it is if you have a good certain marabou quills are better for palmering than others. If you have a thick stem, it might be easier to peel the barbels off of the stem and tie them in than to try to wrap that cracking, thick, nasty stem around the hook. So then I'm just gonna, because I had it out, I don't even know why I had it out, to be honest. I'm just gonna tie in this, I'm gonna call it Predator wrap, but that's not what it is.
For all practical purposes, it's close enough.
It's some kind of wrap, and I'm gonna wrap it around a few times, just like I did with the marabou, and I'm gonna pull as many of the fibers sort of back so that I can create a little bit of accentuated flash in this.
And if somebody was looking to do, like, just real quick on the marabou piece, if somebody was looking to do a two-tone fly with maybe a lighter colored belly and a darker colored top, you know, that's another spot where you can make a good case for stripping the marabou off the quill or clumping it and tying it in. But again, it just depends what you're tying and why you're doing what you're doing. Like, decide what your reason is before you do each step, and then just do it. Like, you may be happy with it and undo it if you really don't like it, or you may say it's great and keep going.
If you're Adam, you will undo it a bunch of times.
I have never done that in my life. What are you talking about?
And if you're me, you'll leave it in, but then you'll throw the fly at the
end. When I was getting into tying, and when these guys would put up with all my silly questions and really diving in, I would do something that I just perceived as wrong, and John would say, "Listen, no, you're fine. Like, just fish it and go," and unwrap it and redo it, and you learn a lot that way. But it was probably a little bit much in retrospect.
We all carry our dysfunctions into our tying. Some are not careful enough. Some are maybe anal retentive.
I was going to use too careful, but that works too.
All right. So then I just built a sloppy head around that and tied it and whipped it. And now I'm just going to throw a little, what is this?
Solaris.
Yeah. Which one though? The really, really thin one.
Oh, that was the other material. If you didn't want to use marabou there, maybe you had laser dub or bruiser blend.
And laser dub could kind of accomplish both things. What the shape that the marabou gave you, and it's injected with its own flash. So you, rather than wrapping it flash separately, it's already in there. So laser dub's not a bad option. Everybody thinks about laser dub as a way to finish the head of a fly, but you can do it within the fly as well.
You want to be sparser, right?
But it's expensive, so don't just cover it completely up.
Yeah, the purpose is just to fill that remaining part of the shank up to the head of that section of the fly. You don't need to go crazy with the amount.
So now I've got the tail section of this fly done. And so I need to think about choosing my hook and then establishing the front of the fly. So the original pattern is tied on a Gamakatsu Siwash hook, and it's a 4/0. This is a 5/0. I don't have any more of the 4/0s. And they used to sell them closed eye. I think they only sell open eye Siwash hooks now, so you'd have to crimp that closed. You could, in theory, do it on the B10S in, say, the 4/0 or 5/0 size. I don't love the shape of this hook for this particular pattern because
short.
No, I want a short shank, but once this hook starts its bend, the gap comes quite a bit farther back than the end of the straight part of the shank. And so I much prefer a traditional J style hook where once that shank ends, that curve goes straight down. It doesn't have this sort of taper. To me, this send something back that even with that shank, it has a good chance of fouling. So I would worry a little bit on the B10S about fouling.
And just to
This last version, which all of my newer ones are on, is the Kona, the big game. And unfortunately, I don't have any 4/0s. I really like it on the 4/0, but I'm out of 4/0s.
I've got both of them right here just for folks to be able to compare kind of what John was just talking about. If you notice on the Gamma 4/0, it's a nice shank. Like the 4/0's got a decent gap, and it's something we use on certain patterns. But if you compare that to and I'm gonna try to hold this so it's easier to see. If you compare that to the Kona big game carnivore, you'll notice that when it bends, it doesn't really go very far back. So there's less for that rabbit strip to foul on.
Yeah. And I really like that carnivore. I like a lot of my musky flies on these big game carnivores.
One of my favorite hooks now, I agree.
But I also, back in the day, really enjoyed this Gamakatsu Siwash hook. It has a really big eye, giant eye, which makes it easier to put on certain clips, for one thing. Another thing that it really does is if you crowd the eye, it gives you a lot of, there's a lot to that eye.
Bite guard in there.
Right, you're unlikely to close that eye or to really mess up the head of your fly because you didn't leave enough room. So I like, it's maybe a nice way to say it would be it's somewhat idiot proof. And I'm a perfect idiot, so I think it's a really good option. And since I have one, it's a 5/0, but that's not so bad. I'm gonna go ahead and use that. And so now I'm gonna put my base of thread on the length of the shank.
And real quick, just self-deprecating humor aside, one of the things that I've noticed about John is the focus is on officiable flies. So especially when you're starting, it's one thing if you're tying commercially and sending out a bunch of flies where you really do try to space each of your wraps and tie-ins where, you have this nice clean thread head right before the full eye of the hook. But the reality is especially when you're learning and God, even if you're trying a new pattern, if you've been tying for a long time, you find yourself at a point in the hook and on the eye where you start to cover up part of that when you're wrapping and whip finishing your head. Realistically, as long as you're still going to have no problem getting your clip or your bite guard, I don't really like to use clips much, but there's a time and a place. You're fine. Like you don't have to cut it off and re-go or anything like that. Like finish it. If you want to put some UV on it and finish it that way or some super glue so you feel better about it, that's fine. But just fish the thing. You'd probably be really happy.
And I really do like clips. I like clips or even split rings. If you have a heavy duty enough split ring, you can tie your steel leader, or if you use fluorocarbon, tie your leader to your split ring, and then just to change flies, just split ring new flies on. So to connect the tail to the hook, I'm using American fishing wire. This is 45-pound test, 1x7 coated. I would say for any articulated patterns where I have a hook in the back, so I might be pulling on a musky from the back, I would use more like 80 or 90-pound. And I have the single strand. I think it's cheaper, but the 7x7 is really awesome too. Although the 7x7 I reserve for actually using for leaders, not so much for flies. So I'm gonna create a little fold. I'm gonna.
You can see it.
I only see a small one. Okay, so I'm creating a bit of a fold just to sort of figure out where the hook's going to be, and I want my flash on top. So now I'm running that through the eye. Luckily, I didn't glue the eye shut. It's going to swing on it nice and easy.
And when John ties that in, you'll notice that he's, I don't believe on this one, doubling the wire back over. To the same point about if you're using a heavier, like I like to use 90-pound coated 1x7 in this capacity. If you're fishing in a trophy class fishery. I'll double this up sometimes or try to lean towards big game shanks or something thick. For anyone who can't see John right now, he's laughing at me. Because you probably don't necessarily do this, especially if you're changing flies a lot. But I also double it over when I'm doing weight bearing articulations. But back to John, since he's not doing a weight bearing articulation.
And if I was, I also would still not double it over. And I'm only going maybe half an inch, where I'm actually thread wrapping for only half an inch on this wire. It's awesomely strong. I encourage you to connect, do a connection with, say, 3/4 of an inch or less of wire, and then do a strength test of it after it's fully wrapped on, and you've got further wraps with materials, and maybe there's glue in there.
Well, and you'll notice in one of our future videos,
there's no way a musky's going to part it before it breaks your fly line.
That's a really good point. Like, we overbuild stuff to make ourselves feel better, because if you're not testing that and you don't know where the line is, you'd rather have it overbuilt. But let's look at Matt Griesky. We did a video with him. He ties his yard sail, and we'll share that video in a little bit. He doesn't fold his wire over where he connects the articulation at all. And anyone who knows Matt and Adaptive Fly, he and his brothers are one of the fishiest musky families out there, I think would be fair to say. So
they catch a few big ones on articulated patterns on the big lake. So
like every time they go together, you like once or twice a year, I think on Thanksgiving.
And Eric uses Matt's flies for his clients too. So if he didn't trust it, if you were ever going to get negative feedback, that would be it, right? If it was going to break, he would have gotten that feedback. It's not, there's so many points that are weaker than that. And certainly without a hook, I try to use as little wire as possible just to keep it out of the way of my tying. It's just one less thing that gets in the way of me spinning my bucktail. So, to me, that's personal preference. If you worry about your rigging, go ahead and go all the way up and all the way back. That's fine. I just don't. I've tested it. I've done it with a lot safer, or more length of tie-in, and it just hasn't made any difference to me. So I've never had one break. So all right. So now we've got our shank tied in to our main hook with wire. We've tried to cover up the burr with some thread. I'll probably break my thread on it still when I get over here. I think Adam would probably file the burr and then maybe put a little glue over it or something to protect the thread.
The first part of that is not true, but the part with the glue is true, because again, I spend a little more time than your average bear on a lot of these flies, and to know that someone's going to be able to catch a bunch of fish on it and they're still going to be able to fish it. Again, John usually has so many flies at the end of the season that he just doesn't just fish another one after he's caught 10 fish on it. But if somebody has a fly and they want to fish it as long as they can, then I think there's, again, a lot of personality type stuff in there.
Oh yeah, and I even just meant, if I wasn't reverse tying, I would probably be gluing the materials as I go. Like when I tie mechanical bulls, I'm gluing those junction points because I'm not reverse tying that bucktail. And so the glue makes it much, much more durable. But because I'm reverse tying, the bucktail is going to break before it comes out. And it's also true that I generally don't fish a fly more than one or 2 days. So unless it really works, and then I'll keep giving it another chance until it looks a little too rough for. So here's another thing about me. Even if you're going for a color scheme, like this is like orange, I almost never will tie a singular color scheme. I'll always want color blending. I just think it looks so much nicer. Even if you want a white fly, stick some tan tie-ins in there
Or some
too.
gray, or
Some
I think
gray, some light blue, some
that's a great
green.
point. Like complexity is, in my opinion, the thing that makes a fly fishier. And I mean, you can go all yellow and probably catch fish, yeah, or all white, yeah, definitely.
It makes me like the fly more. And if you look at somebody like David Sullivan, he comes out with some awesome color combinations. He's got more creativity in his color combinations than just about anybody. And
so his color wheel spins like no other is one of the favorite ways I've heard it phrased.
And his flies are super fishy. So, they have all the great movement, and they have, color triggers too. And how important it is, I don't know. It matters to me because I'm fishing the fly.
Well, and so we've talked about blends and complexity, but one of the things that I've noticed about Sully's fly, contrast in his patterns. So contrasting colors, contrasting textures, thicknesses of feathers, like, it just, every single variation that you can work into a fly. Think about it. Your job with these flies is to get the attention of this fish. Like, do they really think that it's a fish? Probably not. It's a thing that they might be able to eat and get a meal from. So,
his gift is that he can do that without messing with the fly's sort of balance and overall essence. I've tried to do some of that crazy contrast, and he must have an eye where he puts something up and he says yes or no and can figure it out.
Faster than that. Like, I think it's just part of how he ties it. I mean, as you know, Sully's one of the original guys. He literally can pound out a 747 in a very short amount of time, and I think it just comes to him. It's one of those things.
So for me, we recently did a home decoration, and I wasn't allowed to choose colors and things like that for good reason. I'm going more for blending than the contrast, and I will do stuff where I have contrast because I do think sometimes a hot spot can be a trigger on a fly. But in this case, okay, I've got the white tail and I'm going with more earth tones, so I'm going to go tan. And now I've got some cream yellow in here. And then I'm going to stick a little orange in. And that orange, a lot of fish just have orange in them. So I don't think orange is a big contrast to a natural fly. And then the other principle that I tend to follow is I go from light in the back to darker in the front. I almost always finish a fly darker than I start it.
Maybe
the one exception is like a lime tail, where it might have a chartreuse tail and a white head, but almost always just prefer the darker head and the lighter tail. So here we go. I've got my first tie-in on the hook, and it is medium length, but longer than anything that I've used from bucktail perspective in the tail. Medium length cream bucktail. And I might normally use a pen, but one of the bad things about a Siwash hook is you can't use a pen. I'm sure that Musky Town sells something that will solve that problem for you. There's Adam.
I don't know if I look at it again. We've talked about this in a different video that I'm not sure I'll end up going up, but like, this is got a couple different options here. One is, a clear pen. Like, this is, you have a pen and it doesn't have to be clear. Like, it works great, especially on smaller eye hooks. The Proto John is the next step up from that. I like that tool too. It's got these grooves to kind of get your bucktail fibers aligned the way you want. But what I really like about this is it has a groove for jig hooks. And then, these are all nice to have. So I want to be clear about that. Minnesota Fly Tool is a treat. Like, I really like it. And it's got a much bigger, this is the Pike Muskie tool. They also have a bass trout, smaller size. But you can get, I like, the point is, like, you can get,
it looks too much like drug paraphernalia.
You can get pretty ridiculous with this stuff, and it's not all necessary. I mean, I have a lot of this stuff because it's important to us that we test it before we sell it. Like we don't want to carry something that,
This color
actually have practical value.
So just so you know, the other thing that works is 3 fingers, just like that. Look at that.
That's if you want to use 4, there's no rules here. You can do that too.
Size according to your fingers, right?
One thing that I want to add on here just before John moves on to the next step is building the taper in a single versus an articulated fly is a little bit different proposition. In a single, I like to start with the longest bucktail and kind of shorten our way up and build kind of that teardrop baitfish fusiform profile. On a double, because you've got, or a triple, a multi-articulated fly, I like to start shorter with the bucktail in the back. So if this, we'll go through this again, but if this is my first tie-in, and it's a long multi-shank fly, you're going to be getting a little longer and a little longer and a little longer and building up your profile. And with 2 shanks, you're not going to quite do that as much as you would perhaps with 3 shanks or more shanks. But the bottom line is how we build a taper differs from a single to a double to a triple. So think about the shape that you're after as you tie these different material lengths in. But yeah, I don't want to keep hijacking. Please keep going.
And also know that if your lengths aren't precise, they're going to lay back quite a bit in the water. And a lot of times the fly doesn't look awesome coming off the vise, but once it's been swimming a little bit, it finds its happy place and turns out to be a really good fly. The most important thing is, does that fly do something fun in the water? Does it move? Does it inspire you when you're fishing it? And I think that a lot of times worrying about how long a particular tie-in is can take some of the fun out of just seeing how it swims later, or some of the promise of what that'll be. So I'm going to go right to my next bucktail. I'm going to use, what would you call that? Like a medium orange? It's not a
sunburst type of orange.
It's not a hot orange, and I'm starting to pick through it pretty good. So it's kind of got some darker tan stuff mixed in, and I'm not going to worry about it because I'm going to spin it around the hook, and I think it's going to look good.
So, and just for, again, talking about materials density and building bulk towards the head. So whereas you started that fly with, quarter, half a pencil to splay your rabbit strips, you maybe did a half pencil plus for the tie-in after that. You move in towards that kind of 2/3 of pencil thickness on the first tie-in on the shank. Are you still building bulk? Where are you at now?
Yeah, it's definitely more. Now that we're on the hook, part of it is with it being longer and sticking out more, you need a little bit more to maintain bulk, and to, frankly, as you get closer to the front, you want a little more bulk, because the front of the fly is going to put on the brakes, the back of the fly is going to carry forward, and that's going to help create that action. It still can be smaller tie-ins, but you need to do more of them and closer together. So if you feel really inspired to do a whole bunch of different colors, you can do smaller tie-ins and then just keep them really tight together. We don't have time for that. and that's not typically how I would do it. But again, I'm looking for stuff that's going to flare pretty well. So I've gone around this thing twice now. And on the third one, I'm going to start applying tension and let that flare around the hook. Okay, so it should distribute itself. Sometimes if you don't have the right bucktail for a given application, and I have plenty of cases, and before we jumped on camera here, we were talking about the black smoker is kind of the bellwether nighttime fly for a lot of us. But black bucktail is so hard to find with characteristics that tie in really well. So instead of it flaring and spinning around the hook like this, you really need to work it. So you might have to twist it. You might have to pick at it a bunch of times. You might have to apply extra tension to it to get it to do what you want. And then even when you do when it does what you want on the tie-in, it still comes at a cost of being maybe stiffer at the top. This is nice and soft at the top and flaring at the bottom. This is a joy to work with.
That's a nice looking tail. The light's just right on it too.
But the black is generally not as kind, and so you just have to do the best you can with it. So again, 3-finger pack method or push method, and now I'm just going to build my dam.
And again, I want to draw attention. Sorry, keep going.
And this is kind of, at this point, I think if you don't know how to do a reverse tie-in, I think I might start there. There's all sorts of videos about doing reverse tie-ins. And basically it's such an important thing, both for durability and also for creating this profile. You get, a pretty nice looking fish shape, body shape.
You can control that profile taper with your thread dam.
You can.
Yeah. I'm happy that you pointed that out, because I think we talk about this in a couple of the different videos in different spots, but I've seen a few videos recently where folks are like, I get questions about how I do my reverse tie, and they tie in reverse and they push their material back and then they tie back on top of the material, and I cringe. If your purpose is to pump out flies at volume, it works. Like, you can do it and you can get away with it. But, there's a reason that, guys like Popovic's and, have a huge contribution to the craft about, this is how you properly reverse tie, because that control of the taper is the reason that you're being selective of your material. It moves in the water a certain way. What else would you add to that, John?
Well, the other reason you might do that is if you want the durability of a reverse tie, but you want it really tight. You want a really tight profile. You could wrap up onto the material. Generally speaking, for musky patterns, I want some flair. It doesn't have to, some flies have more flair than others. But that's about what I'm typically going for from a body perspective. I might, on a bigger fly, I might flare more, because how do you create all that body, right? You might just need a bunch of ties that stick almost straight up. But for a small fly like this, that seems like a good amount of flair. So go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's just in terms of profile and materials density, there's a bit of a continuum. Like when you first start tying flies, the odds are, and a lot of people do this, that you'll probably use too much material. Like when you first tie, you're still getting a feel for how much bucktail you want on each tie-in and all the different pieces. And some of my first flies used way too much bucktail. And then as you advance and you grow, you'll be a little sparser. And maybe even go too far. Maybe you'll go too sparse. And for some species, like stripers come to mind, like that's great. Like you really don't need all that bulk, because they're going to eat it. I remember one of the first times we fished with Luke Swanson, and we talk about him just because he very much has a trophy fishery in Minnesota that he has become well known both in gear and fly for. The first time he went through my box, he was like, that's too sparse, that's too sparse, that's too sparse, and then pulled out a fly that I thought was too dense. So all that to say, as long as you're doing what you're doing at the vise for a reason, whether that's to hold profile or you're trying to build bulk for a specific purpose because you want to fly to turn and have a certain swim action, it is very important just that you're doing what you're doing with an intent, with intention and thought. And if you want to just lash stuff to the shank and see how it ends up, that's okay too. But just kind of sharing that, what started with too much material then became maybe too little material. And then now I'm actually swinging back the other way, where I'm trying to ride that line of bulky enough to maintain the profile that I'm after, but sparse enough to swim in a very specific way.
Yeah, the thing I might add to that is look back to the striper world and somebody like Ben Wally, who ties a lot of beast flies. You cannot be sparse enough in the tail or bulky or too bulky in the head. That's kind of, you create additional density and bulk as you come forward, and that allows the fly to create turbulence or to have breaks and create movement. And then if you have too much material in the back, it just is a dragging sock. And so having it really, minimalistic in the tail of the fly allows the turbulence as you strip the fly to go over and activate the stuff in the back, or it allows the fly to have additional movement because that isn't just dragging,
That's a great point.
So big flies require more bulk, more materials, but generally speaking, I want more as I work towards the front, I want to build a little more bulk. So now, while we were doing that, I tied in 3 feathers. I don't know if you can see, I've got 1 on the top and then cheeks on either side. You could just do 2 as cheeks or fins or whatever you want to think of them as. I've got 3, just for fun.
That's new. Yeah, I haven't seen the 3rd top feather yet, but I like it.
I think this one's got multiple. The original one has multiple sets of feathers, and they are
nice,
favoring the high side of the fly. They're not pure, but
real quick too, before we move past, John mentioned Ben Wally. Ben is one of our pro staffers. He's also Bob Popovich's protege. He really, I looked at Flycraft today. I'm not sure anyone ties a better beast than Ben. I don't know what Bob would say where he compares his own flies, but Ben is also coincidentally John's neighbor. So they talk a lot of fly theory, and they tie and rod building and all the fun pieces that go with what we do.
Yeah, I was going to say he ties a lot of other great patterns besides. I know he's really well known for his beast flies because probably you're right. Nobody can really do what he does.
But his macro flies are incredible too. All his
and I don't want to take credit away from. I think really highly of Ben's flies. There's a lot of people tying beast flies that look really, really great. But he gets a lot of notoriety for that fly. But he ties a bunch of really great flies, and before he got heavy into beast flies, he did a lot of innovation in crab patterns, and he's kind of a striper guy at heart. But there's a lot to take from that saltwater predator genre into the musky world. It's not the same. We'll
convert him, but we'll try.
It's not the same. He'll probably try it. But those flies aren't the same. We are doing different things for musky than you would do for stripers, just in the sense that a lot of those striper flies are designed to derive a lot of action from the movement of the ocean. So they fish in the white wash of breaking waves around rocks, or they fish in current outflows from estuaries, and so the things that you look for from an action perspective in striper flies are a little different in the way they activate. Musky flies, particularly musky flies that we're looking for in stillwater applications, have to create their own action, or you have to create that action when you're stripping the fly. Striper flies, that fly needs to work with its environment, and it's not easier or harder. It is definitely different. And I have, in many circumstances, tried to bring musky flies to the salt, and most of them I don't love in the salt. They aren't as effective as I would think they would be, given how much I like the way they move in the fresh. So
you're making a really
interesting side note.
Yeah, no, I think it's more than a side note. You're making a really good point. I mean, we'll talk about in the Buford video that shows before this how the Buford's known as one of the quintessential musky patterns, and I would say yes so far as you're fishing it in current. Like if I'm fishing that pattern in still water, think how often in still water, if you've ever seen a baitfish minnow like go and turn and just stop, right? Like there's gonna be times where it works, but it's pretty unnatural. Like the reason that I think we've talked about this some too, John. The reason a Buford works so well in still water is because when it stops and turns, that current keeps it drifting. So it's still moving semi-naturally, and it's got that trigger too. Whereas a smoker has extra action. So, I would say it's more effective in still water than a basic Buford, because when that fly stops and turns between strips, that pause has all this extra movement because of the jackknife rabbit strips on the back of it. What would you add to that?
I would say at this size, I like smokers better. Like the stuff that Sully ties for bigger flies still have a lot of movement, and yeah, it kind of turns and stops, but that does a couple of things. The turn presents a profile to a following fish, and it also gives it an opportunity, right? And so I think it's an effective fly. I like it.
Yeah, I don't want to say we're taking away from the
Yeah.
Buford. I'm just saying, like, if I'm going to fish a Buford type fly in still water, I'll probably err towards a much sparser Buford head, something closer to a bulkhead, because it gives me a little bit of extra glide, just something that, like, it still presents that profile, but it's not so unnatural. Like the same reason that, like, we like the mechanical bull, it swims and turns. It doesn't just stop and turn.
I think that's true, although and a lot of it for me is I've been fishing muskies for well over a decade on the fly now, and I just want to change what I do to some degree. So it's not all. It might be a little bit self-serving to call it all innovation. It's some of it is just doing different things, and like I think you like, much like you can say that with mechanical bull. I think a lot of Matt Griesky's flies, they don't turn as sharply as a Buford, but they do glide out.
They swim and turn. Yeah,
they kind of continue to move, and so to me, those are all different actions, and they all have their place. And you don't know on a given day what's going to create the reaction that from a muskie that you're looking for. And so it's a great idea to give them all a shot and see what works for you. And the other thing to point out is we all fish differently. And
absolutely,
like I might fish a jig very effectively, a jig fly very effectively. Like I'm maybe slow fishing or doing rises and falls in the way I retrieve a fly, and then feeling a slack line fall, and maybe that works really well for me, but somebody else might work really well with a more aggressive fly or a reaction fly. And maybe if you just look to the world of like pro bass fishing, and you see somebody like Kevin Van Dam, who's a power fisherman, he catches a ton of fish, covering a ton of water and fishing much faster than you would expect. And then other guys are equally competitive, or maybe even now more competitive, finding fish on their electronics and just very carefully and very slowly presenting, small, subtle baits to them.
More finesse.
There's more than one. There's a lot of fish out there. They don't all have the same behavior, and so it really comes down to what's going to work for you to find and get a reaction out of a fish the most. And it depends on the fish, and it depends on the fisherman. I've just had so many days with, great fishermen like Jeff Faulkner, who he's catching them and I'm not. And then the next day I might catch him and he's not. And you can spend your whole day watching him and saying, I feel like I'm doing exactly the same thing, but there's something different.
Some nuanced wrist snap or pause or twitch.
And it happens too much to call it just coincidence that he's getting bites and I'm not. Like, okay, he got half a dozen bites and I got 0. You can't call that coincidence. You can't say, oh.
It's hard to just think of it as such. Yeah.
So there are just days where a certain person's style or a certain person's method and fly combination, method of fishing and fly combination is what gets the job done.
You had the hot hand in Minnesota this year. I mean,
on one day. It was one day.
Hey, look, right? Count it though. I mean, we were like,
yeah, right. It counts.
But to John's point on like switching tactics based on, you know, seasonality, water temps, current conditions, like a week before we fished together in Minnesota, we were right in the middle of turnover in Wisconsin, and we were dragging river pigs and weighted stuff across the bottom as slowly as we could. And these fish were eating like barely picking stuff up off the bottom, and you had to be really dialed in. You know, as things warmed up and cooled back down, we switched to smaller baits, like jerk bait style. You know, we're fishing magic bullets, and they were eaten to kill. And then all of a sudden things got cold again, and even snowed while we were fishing. And John found, you know, we're fishing very specialized stuff out there, but John found that, you know, all right, well, if we're, you know, rip stripping really hard on these big flydusa patterns, and then, you know, tear it up and then let the thing fall and count it down extra, you know, they're hitting on the drop. So, you know, mixing it up really is the secret. And that's where like kind of the team fishing mentality of fishing a couple folks in the boat, husband, wife, you know, friends, whatever you do, like try different baits, different sizes, different depths, different line weights, mix it up, and you're going to dial in that much faster comparing your notes over the course of a day or a week, or, you know, wherever and whenever you're fishing.
Yeah. Or not.
Or they're muskies and they're just going to swear at you.
Right. Or muskies are going to suck and you're not going to catch any.
That happens sometimes, yeah.
I'm continuing to work reverse ties and some periodically flash. I don't tie in flash every time I tie in bucktail. I just don't want that much flash. I want it to be an accent. And I like to do flash after I do a little color change. So I've moved forward. I've darkened up. I've gone back to the last one was tan, and now I'm darkening up a little more. I've got I don't know, what color is this? Rust red?
Are you reducing, it's like rust, are you reducing your bucktail length at this point now in your taper?
Not so much. Maybe a little bit. I'm thickening it. It's definitely a little thicker.
3/4 of a pencil or so.
And this is going to be my last one before I do the head. And you'll see on this particular pattern, I kind of do, I reduce the length just in the head. Maybe this is reduced a little bit, but when I tie in the head, I'm going to do like a midpoint of a bucktail this length. And so some of that's going to be out one side and some of it's going to be out the other side. And that will kind of create the taper into the head that I'm looking for. And, you know, it's a fairly short shanked hook. And so there's not a ton of room to build this gradual taper. So it's going to be a little more dramatic. But none of the bucktail in this pattern is particularly long. We're talking just a couple inches of bucktail. You could do a little longer. You could certainly do 3 or 4 inches if you felt inclined to have a bigger profile fly. But I'm pretty content with this being a relatively small pattern.
That's been a pretty recurring theme through our different videos, is that the textures and qualities of the tail, whether that's looking for a certain hollow in the butts or something really fine, is much more important than overall bucktail length. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Certainly for musky flies. I think for striper flies, I really want long bucktails.
Long wispy striper stuff, yeah.
And ideally soft,
yeah.
Less hollow. But for musky, I'm letting them stick up a bit. So the shorter they are, the more I just leave them sticking up. And it still kind of creates almost the same shape, if that makes sense.
It does. Do you mind holding your hand behind the fly just for a minute so folks can see the taper of the material there? Yeah, that's helpful. I just get the shelf is a little bit washed out there. That looks great.
And maybe I can get in front of it a little bit too.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So this particular one, this buck, it really has to do with the quality of the bucktail. It's just as hollow as the other ones, but not quite as soft. So it's sticking up a bit more. I'm not worried about that because my next tie-in is not going to be reversed. And so when I do my next tie-in, it's going to naturally push this back a little bit more. And so we're going to be just fine. Maybe the last thing I could do here is I could tie in a couple more feathers if I'm so inclined. Let me look around to see if I have any. I do have to go and get my kid to bed shortly. So,
well, thank you for getting me.
I think we're gonna.
Doing this with us.
I think we'll skip. I think we'll skip the. I don't know. We'll tie a couple of feathers. Why not?
While you're pulling those out, John had talked a little bit earlier about, as you swim these flies, the profile and the shape of the fly kind of relaxes, and you get a sense of what it's going to look like. Often I like to run it under warm water and like kind of preview what that taper is going to look like. And you don't have to do it all the time, but it's something you can do if you like it. It will help you understand a little bit faster what the taper on the vise is going to look like once you're swimming it and in the water. But again, that's one of those things that if you want to do it, you can. And if you don't, you don't have to.
Unless you're trying to sell the fly, and then you need to do it.
This is also untrue.
I guess it would be safe to say that I tie guide flies. So I don't worry about some bucktail sticking out the front in the head. I try to get things on the way I want them to be on.
I would say you're somewhere between a guide fly and I think you're giving it a little bit of extra attention, love. I mean, you're not like cranking out a dozen and going, whatever, they're in the box, I'm fishing tomorrow and I need to get some sleep and take care of the boat the next day. I mean, guide flies.
Right. I certainly don't need to. I certainly don't need to rush. So I'm gonna do a two-tone head now, and I'm gonna start with the same feather or the same color that I used for my last tie-in, with the exception being that I'm taking it right from the base, and it tends to be darker and mottled right at the base.
On the back of the tail, for anyone who hasn't done this before, where the hairs are extra hollow. And if you try to lift those hairs up and let them go, they'll snap right back down. And that's just a symptom of how hollow the tail is.
I'm trying to find the right hollow, and I'm struggling a little bit with this particular tail.
How thick will you go for this first tie-in? Just again, using that pencil benchmark.
Pencil and a half, at least, I would say, for this one. I want it to be pretty thick.
And there's times where, especially if you're tying this pattern for the first time, or if you have a shorter shanked hook, you may be running out of room here. And if that's the case, and you maybe don't have room for a couple different tie-ins and you want to go 2.5 pencils worth and kind of go more bulkhead, you can do that. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
And the most important thing is not to have a ton of material, but to have somewhat of a disc type shape or a quarter size. You don't need the buoyancy. You just want to put on the brakes. And so my original was really sparse. This one might end up being sparse too if I only do the one tie-in. But if I do two, then I think I will do two. So I'm gonna
talk you into it. So that's good news.
Twisting my thread. You can see I've got, what do I got? 1/2 inch out. That's the size of the head that I want. And I've been around twice. I've got longer out the back, and now I want to twist it around the shank. And this gets a little trickier here because the eye of the hook wants to prevent the flare from happening appropriately. But it's mostly around, looks pretty good. Similar amount, top and bottom. Probably be a little messy, but it's all right. We've been talking, so if the fly reflects
It's
A lack
getting
of
late
attention
too,
and
and he's doing us a favor trying to share a little bit. And if you'll notice, if you're doing this for the first time or if you're doing it for the hundredths of time, if it doesn't rotate around and spin perfectly for you, use your fingers, help it around. That's just fine.
use your fingers, help it around. And if you still can't get it, do what Pat Cohen would do. Pat doesn't spin deer hair. He's probably the finest at working deer hair of anybody I've ever met. And he never spins it. He clumps it. So you can put a clump on the top, flare it, hold it there with your thumb, put a clump on the bottom, flare it, hold it there with your thumb. You get the same, you get the same effect, really.
So I guess we were gonna let it be a surprise, but since you mentioned the man, the myth, the legend, the one of the last videos in this series is with Pat. He does a really cool diver bait fish pattern with us, and he's an absolute wizard.
Yeah, he's good. And I've been to a full day class with Pat, and he was really nice not to laugh at me.
He's salt of the earth. I mean, really, he's one of those guys I can't imagine says anything bad about others. Really good people.
Although if he was gonna, it might have been me that day. All right.
If he did, it'd be because he liked you.
So just because I want to prove that I really don't have any rules, I'm going to finish my last clump. I'm going to finish this fly going lighter again. I'm just going to put a little lighter accent at the very front of the nose.
So all that light to dark talk, and now you're going to mix it up?
It's still thematically light to dark. It's but I want a little bit of the continuity brought back at the very end.
I like the bright spot, the contrast on the head. Looks good.
Another great way to finish this fly is a black face in the front always looks super good. So if you have bucktail that you can flare, or in this case, this is not a very big head, so you can use belly hair, and create plenty of size. No problem with the size for this head. That's a nice way to do it too. So
yeah, it gets a little trickier when you're doing belly hair on, let's say a 747, like a much larger profile with the bigger head. But yeah, when you're using a small Buford head on a pattern like a smoker, a small single Buford, yeah, you can get away with your hair.
Yeah, unless you have a patch of really good belly hair, it has limitations as to how big you can get it.
Yeah, it's rare that I'll use deer hair. I'll almost always use the base hair on a bucktail, but that's just me.
So I'm gonna try to measure this size so that I don't need to do much in the way of trimming. So I want, yeah, oh boy. I am getting close to the front here too. Which you could address with one of Pat's fugly packers, which I have around here somewhere. But unfortunately, I don't have time to deal with right now.
So I actually have one right here, and it's a dedicated tool for you clip it on the shank and you push it. Not something you want to do too often when working with bucktail, but you get a feel for when it's okay.
Okay, so now I've got it on. I've gone around twice. For my third, I want to apply that tension and try to get it to wrap around, and it kind of does. I help it a little, and I misjudge the length. It's too long, but too long is better than too short. I can cut it. So now I'm just gonna make sure I get it on there pretty good. And bring my thread forward and finish my head. And all I need to do to finish my head is just get enough of a thread base in front of this so that I feel like it's durable.
It's like a mini thread dam, yeah.
I'm not trying to push it back per se, because I can just cut it back. So there we go. And now I'm gonna whip finish. And I don't whip finish, I hand whip finish, but Some people probably have a finishing tool that they would do that with. And I cut it off. So now I will put that in front, and you can see if I want the head to be roughly the size of that rust colored hair, I need to cut the front. So I am somewhat rushing through this, and I apologize. And it certainly does not need, and regular scissors work fine for this too. It just, to me, the curvature allows you a little more consistency, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a rotary vise, you have to know that your vise is set where the shank is in the very middle and doesn't move. But I'll usually rough chop because I can put my hand on my armrest at this curve, and I'll just kind of trim as I move around, and then I'll do like the final one freehand like you are.
And I mean, as we've talked about so many times, I don't care that much either. Like, a few hairs sticking up doesn't, the fish aren't dating your fly. They're either eating it or they're not eating it. That's it. That's the basics of the smoker fly. I would say if you fish small bodies of water, streams, small rivers, small ponds and lakes, it's definitely a nice fly to have in your arsenal. It's great for small muskies, great for pike, but it also catches some really big muskies too. So it's a pretty good versatile fly. It's pretty fun to tie, and it is, really fishable. It fishes great. So,
well, John, seriously, thank you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure, man. We'll look forward to having you back on for a couple other patterns. And yeah, thank you I realized we went a little bit over a ton of juicy fly theory and fishing theory in there. And
next time maybe we'll talk about weight.
Oh, we're definitely going to talk about weight. I think we'll be tying a weighted fly for one of those too.
Sounds like a plan.
All right. Thanks, John.